Consider what kind of rewards you get in your everyday life, from money to grades and even praise. Schools, parents, and jobs all use operant conditioning to shape our behavior. Throughout our lifetime, in a variety of ways, we can see operant conditioning take place. So let's take a closer look at that today. Today's focus is going to be on operant conditioning and how it shapes our behavior and mental processes. There are different ways that our behavior is shaped using operant conditioning, using rewards and punishments as opposed to those automatic responses that we saw in classical conditioning. We can even change when we get rewarded to vary the rate of responses and try to make sure the behavior lasts for a long period of time. So let's go ahead and take a look. First and foremost, what is operant conditioning? Operant conditioning was introduced by a psychologist by the name of B.F. Skinner, and he believed that behavior was based on consequences. So behaviors could be strengthened using rewards, or they could be diminished by using some kind of punishment system. So reinforcements are going to be anything that strengthen a behavior. Think about rewards like money and grades. Punishments are going to be anything that stop a behavior. Think about things that are unwanted, like detentions or getting grounded. The law of effect was introduced by another psychologist named Edward Thorndike, who also believed in this idea of shaping behavior. And what he found was what's known as the law of effect, which is very simply that rewarded behaviors are likely to continue. Think about things that you do because you get rewarded for it. This could be, again, things like grades or money for a job that maybe you don't particularly enjoy doing. If the reward went away, the money or the grades, is it possible that so would the behavior? In some cases, the answer might be yes. Let's dive a little bit deeper into reinforcements versus punishments, the two major pieces of operant conditioning. If we want to shape behavior or see a specific behavior out of an individual, we can either use positive or negative reinforcement or positive or negative punishment. So let's take a look at the differences between those. Positive and negative reinforcement both have the same goal. All reinforcements have the same goal, and that is to get a behavior to continue. If we like a behavior and it's a behavior we want to see, we are going to use a reinforcement to encourage that behavior to continue. In positive and negative, think of them like plus and minus. We are either going to add or take something away. So in a positive reinforcement, we are giving something to reward or encourage a behavior. Again, food, money, praise, the common things that we see as positive reinforcements. Negative reinforcement means we're taking something away to encourage a behavior. It is still trying to get a behavior to continue. This is not a bad thing. The thing that we are taking away is likely going to be something unpleasant or something you don't want. So if you get good grades, I will take away your chores or take away your homework assignments. I will remove something that is unwanted or unpleasant in order to encourage a behavior to continue. Even taking an Advil to get rid of a headache, we're removing the unpleasantness of the headache and we are rewarding or continuing the behavior of taking an Advil. The question you can ask yourself is what's going to happen next time? The next time that same behavior comes up, chances are we are going to see it continue as a result of a reinforcement. There are different kinds of reinforcers we can use as well. Primary reinforcers are going to satisfy innate needs that we have. So think about food and water as being primary reinforcers. Secondary reinforcers are going to be learned reinforcers. Things that don't inherently have value, but things that we have learned have value. Money, for example, is a secondary reinforcer. You can't do much with money on its own, but it can help you to buy, say, the food and shelter and other things you need to survive, and so it can be used to reinforce those primary reinforcers. And again, just like in classical conditioning, we can see things like reinforcement discrimination, where you only respond to specific behaviors because they are going to be reinforced. Or reinforcement generalization, you might respond to similar stimuli as discriminative stimulus. For example, if you get an allowance for doing chores, you might only do the specific chores that you need to do in order to get your allowance. That would be discrimination. However, if you start trying out other behaviors, like not only making your bed, but making your siblings or your parents' bed to see if that will also get you that reinforcement, that would be that generalization. When we want to guide someone to a specific behavior, That is known as shaping in operant conditioning. And what we might do with shaping is reward behavior in a slow and incremental process until we get to the desired behavior we want to see. B.F. Skinner, for example, would do this with pigeons as he was training them, where he would first give them a reward for making a partial turn and then turning halfway, and then only giving them a reward when the pigeon turned around in a full circle. That was the ultimate behavior they wanted to see. They would reward that in an incremental process until they got to that desired behavior. In humans, we might see this where we might reward someone for playing quietly for 5 minutes, and then only giving them that reward for playing quietly for 10, and then 15, and then 20. If the goal is to get them to play quietly for 20 minutes, we have to shape that behavior or guide that behavior until we can see that behavior being utilized. When it comes to operant conditioning, there are some things to keep in mind, such as the behavior changes that take place and whether or not these are behaviors that are natural for the species or organism we're working with. If we try and pick a behavior that is not natural, for example, if we try to get a pigeon to use its wing to press a lever instead of using its beak, that would be an unnatural behavior for them. They might be able to be trained to do that using operant conditioning, but eventually what we might see is them reverting back to more biologically predisposed patterns. For example, pecking the lever instead of using their wing to do so. We might also see things like superstitious behavior, where we might see an accidental association between a response and a reinforcement that leads to a behavior. Sports fans might have specific routines that they do when watching their team play that they believe if they don't do that, it's the reason that the team is not successful and loses the game. And learned helplessness, when no matter what you try, it doesn't seem to yield a different result in operant conditioning, can lead someone to essentially give up, feeling like no matter what they do is not going to change the outcome, and learned helplessness is often strongly associated with depression as a result. Some other things that we can do in operant conditioning are change the schedules of reinforcement. Because if we want to see behavior continue for a long period of time, it's not always going to be the best practice to reward that behavior every single time that it's done. That is really helpful for quick learning, and it's referred to as continuous reinforcement. But once the learning has taken place, switching to a partial schedule of reinforcement, where you vary when the reward is given, can help in encouraging that behavior to continue for a longer period of time. There are 4 different reinforcement schedules that you can use to encourage this long-term behavior change. The first one is known as a fixed interval. Fixed meaning we know, and interval meaning amount of time. So we know how much time is going to take place before a reward is given. This is like a job where you are paid every 2 weeks. And yes, you do have to work in order to get paid, but there is nothing that you can do that will make the reward come faster. If you get paid on Fridays every 2 weeks, you have to wait for that time to lapse. And once that time has lapsed, you will get your reward. So you know how much time is going to pass before the reward will come. A variable interval means you don't know how much time is going to pass. So this is where you are just waiting to see when you get a reward. This is like going outside at night and looking for a shooting star. You can stand outside for 10, 15 minutes, an hour, or 4 hours. You have no idea how long you will be standing out there until that reward of that shooting star will come. Yes, you do need to do one action, step outside, but after that, it is completely outside of your control. And so this one is going to be the least impactful when it comes to encouraging a behavior to continue. Fixed ratio schedules of reinforcement means that we know the number of times we have to do something before we get a reward. This would be like getting a raise after selling 3 cars at a car dealership. You know exactly what you need to do and how many times you need to do it before that reward of a raise will come. Or you get paid after making 10 t-shirts for a t-shirt company. You know exactly what you need to do and how many times you need to do it before you get a reward. And last but not least is a variable ratio. In this case, we don't know how many times we need to do something before a reward comes. This is like gambling, because you have to continue to do the behavior each time you have to play or not, but the only way that you'll see if you get a reward is to continue the action of playing. If we're talking about a slot machine, you pull the slot, you see if you win, you do or you don't. In order to have another chance to win though, you have to play again. So variable ratio is dependent on your behavior, and you have no idea when the reward is coming. It's highly addictive in that way, and is most likely going to see that behavior continue for a long period of time. We can see this through graphs like scalloped graphs, and this shows us that typical rate of responding that occurs when reinforcements are provided intermittently rather than continuously. There might be a drop-off when we're no longer being rewarded, but once the reward comes back, we'll see an uptick in that behavior, and so that behavior will over time continue to increase. Last but not least, the final thing that we can talk about today are the cognitive and social factors in learning. Because even though those original behaviorists only wanted to focus on observable behavior, there are going to be some thought processes going on behind the scenes that are going to lead to specific behavior changes that we see in individuals. The social learning theory focuses on the idea that we can learn from watching others, whether that's because we see somebody else be rewarded or because we see a particular behavior being modeled. Vicarious conditioning is what happens when we see someone else being reinforced or punished, and that then changes our behavior. It's like when you see someone else get rewarded for a behavior, and so you engage in that same behavior. Or if you see a sibling get yelled at for doing something wrong, you know not to do that behavior, even though you were not the one being punished. And modeling is learning from watching others, simply through imitating their behavior. This was made famous by Bandura's Bobo doll experiment, but in many cases we can see when others model behavior, we can learn how to imitate that. And then finally, there are some cognitive factors that play a role in learning, even if those early behaviorists ignored them. Things like insight learning can take place, where all of a sudden we have a sudden realization of an answer to a solution. It's like those aha moments when we finally figure it out. Latent learning is what happens when we don't necessarily see the learning take place until a reinforcement is present. For example, if a teacher asks a question in class and you know the answer, you might not raise your hand because that might not be a reward that you want to receive at that moment. But if that same question shows up on a test and now you're getting a grade for it, now there's a reinforcement that's present that's enough for you to demonstrate that latent learning that took place. Cognitive maps are another type of learning that we don't necessarily see. It is forming that visual map in your mind of places and locations that once you have an incentive, now you'll be able to demonstrate your learning. So if you walk around the building of your school and you get a general lay of the land, you're building a cognitive map. Now, when it's time to get to class on time, when there's an incentive to do so, you can find the fastest route to get there because of that cognitive map that exists in your head. So we learn in a wide variety of ways, through classical, operant conditioning, and through observational learning. There are so many ways that our environment shapes who we are, and we're going to continue to explore that in social psychology too. For now, thank you so much for watching, and as always remember, be kind to your mind.